In 1928, Manly P. Hall published a book that made occultism mainstream. The Secret Teachings of All Ages put esoteric knowledge on the map. And inside the book, he covers literally everything, from Atlantis to solar deities like Jesus as a sun god, to ancient Egyptian pyramid power and the mystical geometry that went into creating it, to esoteric Kundalini energy. Manly P. Hall is the librarian of modern occultism. But the real story of his life goes even deeper. Surrounded by Hollywood elites, bankrolled by mysterious millionaires, and told secrets about esoteric powers that could change the world. This is the story about a man who may have known too much and wrote all of it down in numerous books that he published throughout the decades. He spent years exposing secret agendas and how the world really works. But by the end of his life, he actually would lose everything to a secret agenda that he never could have seen coming. This is a story of Manly P. Hall. So sit back, relax, and welcome to camp. What's up, people, and welcome back to camp. My name is Mark Gagnon, and thank you for joining me in my tent, where every single week we explore the most interesting, fascinating, controversial topics from around the world, from all times, from all ages. And oh boy, today we're diving into a deep one. But before, let's talk about my good friend Christos. He's joining me every single week on the ones and twos, making sure I look beautiful. Christos, how are you?
Oh, I got so much to say, Mark.
And what's that?
That I love my job, and I'll shut up now.
You thought I was going to tell you to stop it. Well, hey, not today, pal. You know what? I thought you were really going to have something for the people. And this is why I always tell you to just jam it, because every time I say, you know what, Christos, here's your moment, you always blow it. All this yapping.
Sorry, I blew it.
Guys, we were talking about a fascinating man, perhaps the father of esoteric mysticism in America as we know it today. It is a man by the name of Manly P. Hall. Now, I've been fascinated by this dude for a while. I even have the coffee table book of Manly P. Hall. I got this years ago, and I was like, dude, this thing is so sick. It's the Secret Teachings of All Ages. I mean, it is an opus if you were interested in Western occultism, and he goes through everything. I mean, from everything you can imagine that could be packed into a book about occultism. And this guy was doing it back in the early 1900s. And then a friend of mine was like, dude, you should do an episode on Manly P. Hall. This guy's pretty crazy. I'm like, oh, is he ever? Check out the book. I mean, this is way too big of a book to read. Imagine just curling up on an airplane trying to read that. You'll piss off everyone in 45D and B. Almost broke the tent. Anyway, let's jump in, all right? Who is Manly P. Hall, and why is he so important to our understanding of American occultism? So, 1901, Peterborough, Ontario, a dentist named William Hall hooks up with a chiropractor named Louise Palmer, and they have a baby. And then William Hall vanishes. Louise then gives birth to a child and names him Manly Palmer Hall, which, for the record, awesome name. We're saying oh yeah, Manly P. Hall, that was his name. Manly is a crazy first name that I don't think we give enough credit to. That's an awesome name that I think needs to come back. So this guy, Manly P. Hall, is born, and Louise is already, neck deep in Rosicrucian philosophy. She's reading about ancient wisdom and mystical transformation while practicing, chiropractic medicine in a small Canadian town. But by the time Manly turns 2, Louise decides that she's done with motherhood and leaves to chase the Alaskan gold rush. So she dumps young Manly with his maternal grandmother, who he calls my esteemed grandmother. And by the age of 6, he's already bored with first grade and apparently already reading Victor Hugo when he was at home. I mean, the kid is clearly smart, but he's smart and, he's got no money. He's living in a pretty bad situation. So in 1919, when Hall is 18 years old, he and his grandmother moved from Canada to Los Angeles to reunite with his mother, who was living in Santa Monica at the time. But almost immediately after arriving, he got pulled into mysticism and esoteric philosophy. He starts attending lectures, meeting the right people, absorbing knowledge, like he'd been studying this his entire life. And by 1920, barely a year after arriving, he's giving his own lectures on reincarnation. Now again, by 1920, obviously reincarnation is very popular in the East. It's very popular in Buddhist and Hindu philosophy. And so for this guy to be talking about it in Santa Monica is pretty strange for the time period, okay? Most people spend years studying before they feel confident enough to teach, but Hall went from small-town nobody kid to metaphysical lecturer in basically 12 months at just 20 years old. Either he was an absolute genius who absorbed decades worth of knowledge instantly, or he had like a mentor or a teacher teaching him behind the scenes. The Church of the People in downtown Los Angeles took him in as their preacher, which is where he started really showing people what he knew about spiritualism and mysticism and esoteric philosophy. But here's where things get strange. Around this time, two wealthy women named Caroline Lloyd and her daughter Estelle started sending Hall money. Not small donations, like a little $100 here and there. This was significant chunks of their income. The Lloyd family owned oil fields in Ventura County, so they had serious cash to throw around. But they weren't known for supporting young scholars or writers. They weren't general philanthropists. Their focus was laser targeted on Hall specifically for some reason. When Caroline Lloyd died in 1946, she didn't just leave Hall a nice little remembrance gift. She left him a house, $15,000 in cash, and an annual percentage of her family's oil field shares worth about $10,000 a year for the next 38 years. That's roughly $150,000 in today's money, just in shares. But the financial backing was just one piece of this big puzzle. Hall's personal connections started forming almost immediately after he arrived in LA, and these weren't the kind of connections that like a poor kid from Canada would typically make. So, enter Max Heindel. He founded the Rosicrucian Fellowship in 1909, establishing it as one of America's most important occult organizations before his death in 1919, and his widow took Hall under her wing, basically in the early 1920s, and this wasn't just like casual mentorship. She started giving him training in esoteric traditions that usually took people decades to understand. I mean, stuff like ceremonial magic and like Hermetic philosophy and alchemical symbolism, like crazy stuff that like serious practitioners of like the occult spend like a lifetime studying. He just got a direct line from the wife of the man who started basically the Rosicrucian membership in this area. So through her, Hall got connected to an entire network of practitioners and scholars, and by his early 20s, he's rubbing shoulders with like the biggest names in the business of the occult, including Harry Houdini. Yes, that Harry Houdini. This one right here on the wall. The escape artist was deeply involved in investigating spiritualism and the occult phenomena all the way through the 20s and spent years exposing fake mediums and fraudulent psychics while maintaining a genuine interest in like authentic esoteric practices. Houdini had zero patience for people that he thought was just wasting his time or con artists or charlatans. And the fact that he gave Hall any attention kind of suggests that he was demonstrating some at least knowledge or potentially even abilities. And then, of course, you have Aleister Crowley. Now, if you know anything about 20th century occultism, you know Crowley, right? We did a whole episode on him. You should check it out. And the press loved to call Crowley the wickedest man in the world. But that was a lot of tabloid stuff, right? That was the media that didn't really understand him. And, Crowley obviously played into it a little bit. But what matters here is his incredibly high standards. Crowley, again, is another person that doesn't waste time on people that he thinks are dumb or intellectually inept or spiritually shallow. And the fact that he interacted with Hall kind of shows something significant about how seriously Hall was taken at the time. Now, this is where things get a little weird. Rumors have always floated around that both Houdini and Crowley had ties to intelligence work. Houdini was constantly traveling, making him the perfect cover for, gathering intel. And Crowley, he had this global occult sort of connection. He speaks different languages and didn't really seem to care who he worked with as long as it kind of served whatever his goals were. And though nothing's been proven definitively, intelligence historians have found some circumstantial evidence to keep a lot of these theories alive. And even if there's a grain of truth to them, Hall's early connection put him smack in the middle of something a lot bigger than, just books and, mystical rituals. Some believe Hall wasn't just a rising star. He was being watched, potentially even backed by intelligence agencies. The idea is that someone saw his potential to sway people searching for something beyond the traditional religion. He gave them a little help kind of getting there. And of course, there's no hard proof, but a lot of historians will write this off as conspiracy talk. But when you factor in how fast he rises and the money from these wealthy oil benefactors for kind of no reason and the rare books and, the ties to the people that potentially worked in intel, it's a theory that doesn't just go away. And the timing only adds to fuel the claims, right? Hall blows up right as America's drifting from old school Christianity and diving into spiritual experimentation, right? The 1920s are full of this, just like a lot of chaos across the board, from political to religious, identity. Everything is kind of up for grabs. And here's Hall, this sharp, smart, well-funded, and somehow already fluent in sort of ancient systems of thought. And whether it was all luck or part of like a bigger plan, one thing is certain. Hall became the perfect middleman between ancient occult wisdom and the modern mind. The question that hangs in the air for many people that read his books are, how did he learn so much so quickly? So in 1923, something strange happens. Manly Hall, just 22 years old, publishes The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. And again, this is pre-Google, and a lot of people nowadays have heard about Freemasons, but at the time, it really was not as common as it is today, and there's no way you can just Google a YouTube video and learn about Freemasonry. He does a full book, a deep dive into Masonic symbolism and philosophy that reads like it comes from an insider. But here's the kicker. Hall wasn't even a Freemason. He wouldn't join a Freemasonic lodge for another 30 years. So that raised a lot of eyebrows. The book didn't just, skim the surface. He wasn't just regurgitating public info or like summarizing rituals. He was making big claims that Masonry wasn't a social club or like a charity group. That kind of was put on at the surface, but it was a full-on spiritual science, almost like a religion that was built to reshape the soul through hidden truths and a very, very robust initiation ritual. He wrote stuff like, unseen powers shape the destiny of those who take Masonic oaths. And he described the square and compass as codes for these universal spiritual laws. He has a famous quote, "The true lodge is the universe itself." And he makes it clear that he saw the entire system as this sort of symbolic spiritual roadmap to understanding reality. And Masons didn't really know what to make of it. Some were impressed, others were kind of uncomfortable. How does this guy know so much? Why is he revealing so many things that he shouldn't be? But that didn't slow Hall down at all. In 1926, he wrote about caduceus, a winged staff with two snakes, and he tied it to Eastern mysticism. He claimed that the staff represented the spine and that the snakes symbolized the dual energy channels from yoga, the Ida and the Pingala. Basically, he was saying Freemasonry and Hinduism were just describing the same inner transformation, just kind of in different symbols and different languages. So, by 1932, Hall pushed this idea even further with the book Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries. In it, he unpacked spiritual androgyny, basically arguing that ancient mystery schools used the idea of the hermaphrodite, not literally, but as a symbol of inner balance between masculine and feminine energy. And obviously, a hermaphrodite, for anyone that doesn't know, is someone that might be born with ambiguous genitalia, someone that perhaps has, both male and female. Sometimes we call them intersex, but someone that would have, like basically masculine and feminine. And this shows up a lot through ancient literature. And he's saying this is not literal, that this is actually a symbol, something that's deeper, more mystical. And he points to the Genesis story and Plato and various other stories in history that describe a unified original human split into two halves. Hall claimed that the original human, the first man in Genesis, Adam, was actually created as a kind of male-female being. Because according to him, the split into separate sexes didn't happen until Eve was taken from Adam. That, Adam is made from the dirt and Eve is taken from the rib of Adam. And in order to create feminine from Adam, he must have had feminine and masculine within him the entire time. He saw similar themes in ancient myths and even referenced scientific work like Ernst Haeckel's The Evolution of Man to argue that early life forms were also hermaphroditic. And for Hall, this wasn't just a theory. He believed spiritual androgyny was the goal, to reunite the opposites and return to this divine state of wholeness. It even sparked conspiracy rumors that Hall himself was a hermaphrodite, and there is no proof of that necessarily, but the idea stuck around. Then in 1928, Hall publishes his Magnum Opus, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. That's the book I was just showing you right there. He was just 27 years old at the time, and the book was massive. 700 pages covering everything from Egyptian temples to Masonic allegories, from Pythagoras' theorem to shamanic rituals. Literally everything you could ever imagine about occultism is in that book. And if people believed it had spiritual value, Hall basically put it in there. And the crazy part, he didn't write it like some stuck-up scholar. He explained everything in very clear, plain English and made a lot of these really complicated esoteric ideas make a lot of sense. And while a lot of these sort of mystical occult books were designed to kind of confuse outsiders, Hall made it feel like you were just kind of having a smart conversation with someone who actually knew what they were talking about. And his main point was just this: all those symbols, the myths, the rituals across time, they're not random. They were pieces of this single global tradition that all these disparate groups from different times and different ages and different countries were all tapping into the same thing. They were all describing the same thing, what he calls the secret doctrine. And if you could crack the code, you would start to see the deeper truths behind human consciousness and the universe itself. So one example that he gives is the Hiramic legend of Freemasonry. And we actually talked about this legend in a different episode about secret societies. But if you don't know, in the myth, Hiram Abiff is the master builder of Solomon's temple. And he gets murdered by 3 thugs trying to steal the secret words of the master mason. And, for Hall, he doesn't just retell the story, he unpacks it kind of word by word. Firstly, he spells Hiram with a C, like Hiram. Some occultists believe that the CH sound symbolizes life force or fire or divine energy. It also relates to chi, the root word of Christos, which, in and of itself is like Christ, right? Has a religious connection, but also a Gnostic one. So you have Chi, Christos, Hiram. He says these things are all connected. And to him, Hiram represents my Father, the universal spirit, in one essence, 3 in aspect. Basically the classic, dying God story, right? Like Osiris or Christ, Dionysus, all kind of rolled into one thing. I mean, the guy basically turns like a Masonic legend into this cosmic allegory, much bigger than, any Freemason might assume.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because you own a small business, or maybe you work for a small business, and I am about to make your life so much easier. Let's say, hypothetically, you own a little, furniture business, right? And you're struggling to keep track of the raw materials, the production schedule, invoicing clients, all that stuff. Well, that's why I want to tell you about Odoo, okay? Because with Odoo, it's an all-in-one business platform that streamlines everything. Now you have inventory management, you have manufacturing, you have accounting apps that will make everything so simple. So now if you have a small business, you can monitor the inventory in real time, schedule production calls more effectively, and you can send invoices automatically, all from one platform. Plus, you get a customized CRM to track sales leads and follow up with potential clients, boosting your closing rates. Back in the day, you'd probably have to get, some, Ivy League operator, business person that's, able to make everything happen for you. But now with Odoo, it cuts it all out. And I'm sure you're thinking, okay, if this is going to make my life easier, give me more free time to spend with my friends, family, and playing softball, and make me more money, it must be crazy expensive. This is the good news. Listeners of this program are going to get a 14-day free trial. That's right. You get 2 weeks with Odoo completely for free when you go to odoo.com/camp. That's right. Odoo.com. Use the promo code CAMP and you will get 14 days for free just to try it out. See if you like it. If it's not for you, you don't need it. All right. But Odoo is going to make your life so much easier. Everything you need all in one place. Save time, make more money. Now let's get back to the show.
And then, of course, there's Atlantis. Again, this guy's going through everything. You're thinking Atlantis, you're like, oh, this must have popped up in like the 70s. No. Hall didn't ignore it like a lot of other writers. He didn't call it a myth or a thought experiment by Plato. He treated Atlantis like it was a real place. He described, advanced tech and mystical wisdom and its destruction. Hall believed Atlantis wasn't some ancient city that sank, but it was the cradle of all esoteric wisdom. So according to him, the Atlanteans were deeply advanced in not only science, but also spiritual knowledge, and they understood the laws of nature and energy and geometry and consciousness on a level far beyond our modern understanding. He described them as a civilization ruled by priest kings who combined political power with mystical knowledge. But he also said that their fall was the result of spiritual corruption, not a physical destruction or a war. As the Atlanteans became more obsessed with power and materialism and ego, they drifted away from the spiritual path. And this decay, according to Hall, triggered a massive cataclysm that wiped out the entire civilization. But here's the thing. Hall believed that after Atlantis had fallen, a few enlightened survivors actually escaped, and they carried the core teachings of their civilization with them. And these survivors went to Egypt and South America and Asia, where they planted the seeds of what would become the mystery schools and this ancient spiritual system. And Hall described these survivors as a hidden brotherhood of these enlightened beings, some possibly immortal, others just extraordinarily long-lived, who throughout time have shown up under different names. The Egyptian initiates, the Atlantean priests, the Greek philosophers, medieval alchemists, all a part of the same ongoing mission to keep humanity from losing touch with this divine wisdom. And this is where most of the critics of the time, they kind of just tapped out. They called it fantasy. They said, this is a sci-fi book. This is not history. But Hall, he never blinked. He laid it out with the same tone that he used for everything else, which made it more convincing to some and a little more suspicious to others. And the book went crazy. He published it, and this thing just went nuts. Everyday readers loved how accessible it was, and occultists saw it as like a legit reference book. And some scholars and academics were mixed. Some respected the research because he was talking about, some legit Eastern philosophies and like the principles of what they believed, while others rolled their eyes at obviously the wilder claims like Atlantis. And there were some issues in the book as well, of course. There's, a couple of outdated theories that don't really hold up. There's obviously some racist undertones, and even some claims like, Francis Bacon wrote Shakespeare. He was a guy that was talking about that, especially in the day, which if you don't know is basically this idea that, Shakespeare was just like the front man for this, group of Rosicrucians that are secretly trying to imbue wisdom into society. And, Francis Bacon was the name of one person or maybe many people that basically wrote all of Shakespeare's plays for him. Is it true? Who knows? It's a conspiracy theory from back in the day that Manly P. Hall was all over. But the big red flag for many was this. Hall was writing in detail about groups he'd never officially joined, right? He was a Freemason, but not until 1954. And he claimed Rosicrucian ties, but didn't get formal recognition for years. So where is he getting all this information from? Was he just pulling from obscure books that no one else was reading? Did someone inside these groups feed it to him? Was he just kind of built different and able to piece together these meanings from these symbols that a lot of people didn't notice? And that mystery would follow him for the rest of his life. But in 1928, none of that mattered. The secret teachings of all ages put Hall on the map for good, and nothing about his story is really normal. So the success of his book changes everything, practically overnight. He went from this, young philosopher to this wealthy, self-made occult celebrity that made crazy money off these real books, enough to fund the kind of lifestyle the most esoteric writers could only dream of. But instead of blowing it on luxury, Hall actually doubled down. He used the cash to start collecting very rare books and artifacts that he'd been writing about. And he wasn't just browsing local shops. He was hitting Sotheby's auctions and, grabbing these alchemical manuscripts and old grimoires and one-of-a-kind pieces of occult history. And by the 1930s, his collection was already becoming one of the most serious private libraries of mystical texts in the world. His trips to London were specifically fruitful. The Great Depression had hit Europe very hard, and tons of private collectors were being forced to basically sell off entire family libraries. And Hall had both the money and the eye to spot real treasure, and he bought them cheap, while a lot of other people overlooked them. So by the 1930s, his shelves were stacked with original works from Paracelsus and Agrippa and John Dee. He even owned alchemical texts from people who claimed they'd actually pulled off transmutation. There were books in his collection that straight up didn't exist anywhere else in the world, just proper one-of-ones. But he didn't keep it all locked away. Hall opened his library to scholars and researchers and serious students. If you had a real reason to be there, he would honestly give a lot of people access. And this obsession with preserving knowledge, specifically occult knowledge, led to something much bigger. In 1934, Hall founded the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles. Not just a hobby project. This was a full institution with its own building, a staff, a clear mission, and the mission was basically teach people the deeper meaning behind philosophy, religion, and ancient wisdom. The Philosophical Research Society, or as they called it, PRS, offered lectures, classes, and a legit research center. They were basically doing everything that, a university would do. And it wasn't just some new age club in someone's garage. It was legit. And he didn't slow down at all. He kept cranking out books and lectures and articles. But by this point, something had kind of shifted. The raw, world-shifting energy of secret teachings gave way to more structured, less groundbreaking material. He was still prolific, but it felt more like he was expanding on old ideas than revealing anything new. And that shift lined up with a major move he made in 1954 when he finally joined a Masonic lodge. And this caused a massive stir. Some Masons welcomed him with open arms. After all, he'd done more to explain and preserve Masonic symbolism more than most members ever could, right? I mean, this is a guy that's passionate about this kind of work. He knew everything. He knew more than most of them by the time he joined. But others weren't as thrilled. To them, Hall had spent decades writing about things that were never supposed to be talked about, never supposed to be published, and now he wanted to get in. Even weirder, once he joined, Hall flew through the ranks. Most people spend years moving up and they try to rise the ranks of Freemasonry, but Hall got the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, the top honor, faster than anyone. His supporters said, yeah, it made sense. He basically lived the life of a Mason for 30 years already, but his critics called it favoritism and that the guy clearly had access to secret info long before he ever joined. Same with the Rosicrucians. Hall had been wearing their symbols and referencing their teachings since the 1920s. Remember, his mom was also connected to the Rosicrucians, so it was pretty normal for him. But formal recognition came much later, and again, when it did, he shot up the ranks. So either Hall was just brilliant, or his early claims of sort of accessing hidden wisdom weren't so far-fetched. Whatever the case, this marked the beginning of a new chapter for him. Hall wasn't just the outsider anymore. He had credentials, the reputation, and the insider status to match. But Hall had a few other wild ideas. He believed the United States wasn't just some political experiment, but that it was the result of centuries-long conspiracy put forth by enlightened thinkers to build the ideal nation. And this isn't just your typical, shadowy group of elites take over the world conspiracy. Hall called it the Great Plan. According to him, it was a good conspiracy, one designed to create a country built on spiritual freedom and self-governance and higher principles. And he laid it all out in a 1944 book called The Secret Destiny of America, and later expanded on it in America's Assignment with Destiny. These weren't casual history books. Hall was dead serious about proving that America was the end game of some type of mystical, cosmic plan that had been in motion for thousands of years. He claimed it all started with ancient philosophers like Akhenaten in Egypt, who pushed monotheism and sun worship, and Plato, who dreamed up the perfect government in his work, The Republic. Hall actually linked them to medieval Islamic scholars and Renaissance thinkers and early European visionaries that he believed were all quietly working towards one singular goal, a future nation where spiritual and political freedom could thrive. And the goal, according to Hall, took shape during the European age of exploration. He said people like Francis Bacon and Sir Walter Raleigh weren't just thinkers, they were agents of the plan. He thought that Bacon's book, New Atlantis, wasn't just philosophy, but it was a blueprint for America. But it gets even crazier, because Hall believed even Christopher Columbus was in on it. He claimed that Columbus was a secret operative connected to esoteric orders, tied to figures like Lorenzo de Medici and Da Vinci. And his journey, Hall says, wasn't about trade routes. It was about laying the groundwork for this new experiment. And then, of course, the Founding Fathers. Hall claimed that Washington, Franklin, and the rest weren't just brilliant politicians, but that they were a part of a secret society trying to fulfill this ancient vision. He pointed out their Freemason ties, which are well documented, and he even pushed further, arguing that they were deeply influenced by Rosicrucians and other occult traditions. And one of Manly P. Hall's favorite stories, and the one he references more than once, was about a mysterious, unnamed man who appeared during a crucial moment at the Continental Congress in 1776. According to the legend, as tensions ran high and the decision to break from Britain hung in the balance, this stranger stood up and delivered an otherworldly speech. His words reportedly electrified the room, swaying the hesitant delegates and pushed them towards signing the Declaration of Independence. And just as suddenly as he appeared, that same man vanished. No one knew who he was, and no one could identify him, even to this day. And to most people, it might sound like a patriotic myth or this dramatized footnote in history that didn't really matter. But to Hall, that wasn't just a coincidence. It was symbolic proof of something much deeper, that hidden forces were at work behind the scenes, guiding the birth of the United States. He believed that that mystery figure wasn't just some impassioned citizen, but perhaps an agent of a higher plan. Maybe even a member of a secret order sent to ensure that the great experiment unfolded exactly as intended. In Hall's mind, it wasn't just history, it was destiny in a way. Like cosmically, like the forces of the universe were nudging this forward with invisible hands. And he even dove deep into the Great Seal of the United States. He claimed that the unfinished pyramid is a symbol of America as this evolving spiritual project, and that the all-seeing eye is a representation of divine guidance. And all the Latin phrases, including, e pluribus unum or novus ordo seclorum, weren't just fancy flourishes. To Hall, they were coded messages about America's destiny as a beacon of this spiritual evolution. And because this is Manly P. Hall, he didn't stop there. He linked all of this to the Mayans, saying that their peaceful civilization had used similar principles that somehow influenced the U.S. Constitution. I mean, this guy was taking scattered historical fragments and weaving them into this massive narrative that spanned centuries and continents and people groups. And historians mostly dismiss this entire theory. A lot of it cannot be verified, and Hall definitely put meaning into things that, may have not had any meaning at all. But what's interesting is that his ideas actually made their way into American politics. Presidents like Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman were reportedly influenced by Hall's writing, but the most interesting case is Ronald Reagan. Reagan was allegedly given a copy of The Secret Destiny of America during his political rise, and according to multiple sources, it really stuck with him. His speeches about America being a city on a hill and having a divine mission to spread freedom kind of sound a lot like Hall's talking points. And whether Reagan knew the esoteric roots of these ideas or he just got a cool book and liked how they sounded, he helped push Hall's vision into the mainstream and made it patriotic instead of occult. Now, some people look at this and say, see, Hall was right. His vision of secret society shaping America wasn't just a theory. It made its way all the way to the White House. But others think that Reagan was just using feel-good language that happened to overlap with Hall's ideas, and maybe he had, some type of, nostalgia, or he just happened to like the way that he wrote. Who knows? Either way, Hall's version of America as a nation with this mystical mission still resonates. For some people, it's a more exciting story than we just didn't want to pay British taxes. It taps into something much deeper for Americans, a sense that the country was meant to be something more. But the irony is that Hall spent his life writing about secret agendas and hidden hands steering society, but yet, in his later years, it started to look like maybe he was the one being manipulated. So by the 1970s, Manly Hall had become exactly what he spent his life studying, just a true mystery. He was respected and well-known and publishing books, but the deeper truth about who he was and what motivated him still was very unclear. The guy who had written for decades about secret knowledge and hidden forces was now surrounded by a lot of questions of his own. So in the 1950s, he got married to Marie Schweikert, but even that kind of raised eyebrows. She was much younger, had no background in the occult, and kind of kept a low profile. And most people figure Hall would stay single and completely devoted to his work. So the relationship left a lot of people guessing. And they never had kids, which Hall said was intentional. He didn't want to split focus between family and his research, but that only added fuel to the long-standing rumors about his sexuality, and maybe he was a hermaphrodite. Who knows? As he got older, it kind of showed. His lectures became slower, a little bit more scripted, and his longtime followers started to notice that he was repeating older ideas once again instead of breaking new ground and pushing forward. But the real red flag was a younger man named Daniel Fritz. He joined the staff at the Philosophical Research Society in the 80s and quickly became Manly Hall's right-hand man. He had no serious background in philosophy or the occult, but somehow ended up controlling Hall's entire schedule, the personal decisions, and even parts of the organization itself. And people who had known Hall for decades said that he was never the same after Fritz had arrived. Friends, staff, students were gradually kind of pushed out or distanced from Hall's inner circle, which of course led to longstanding rumors about, Daniel and Manly P. Hall, and maybe they had a romantic relationship. But several people close to Hall believed that he was being just straight up manipulated or exploited. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because I got to tell you a story. Imagine you're sitting in your house. It's cold outside. It's a little snowy. And you're like, man, I just want a panini. So you go and you order it, from DoorDash or something like that. And it never gets to you. You're looking at the app. You're like, dude, it's been 4 hours. Where's my panini? You're calling. No one answers. Well, this is a true story that happened. There was a woman, a client, that was working as a DoorDash driver, and she slipped and fell on an icy walkway outside of a Panera Bread in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She breaks her elbow, which leads to surgery and hardware having to get inserted into her arm. She can't work. And originally, she sues Panera, and Panera's like, okay, we'll give you like $125,000. But then the good people over at Morgan & Morgan fought for her and got her the $1 million verdict that she deserved. Yes. If you never heard of them, Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. Yes, and they're that way for a reason. They've been fighting for the people for over 35 years. Now, I'll be honest, if I ordered, a panini and the woman gets paid $1 million because she slipped, it's a tragic thing to happen, of course, but I deserve a little bit of that. I should get a cut at least, right? I'm the one that ordered the panini. If I never ordered that panini, she never would have slipped, never got $1 million, which obviously she deserved. You know what I mean? But maybe next time she gets $1.1 million, I can get a cool 100,000 out of that. Regardless, all I'm saying is if you're ever injured and you are looking to get the money that you deserved, the compensation that is entitled to you from your injuries, Morgan & Morgan could be the way to go. Hiring the wrong law firm can be disastrous. You can be locked up in litigation. It's a nightmare. But hiring the right law firm could substantially increase your settlement. And with Morgan & Morgan, it's easy to get started. Their fee is $0 unless they win. That's right. Their fee is free unless they win your case. You don't pay you pay 0 cents unless they win your case. You can visit forthepeople.com/gagnon, Gagnon. That is forthepeople.com/gagnon, or dial #law. That's #529 from your cell phone. That's forthepeople.com/gagnon, or click the link in the description below. And thank you so much to the good folks over at Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this program and making this show possible with this paid advertisement. Well, let's get back to the show. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because you need to rebrand your crotch. That's right. You need a full rebrand on your dong, and you're going to do it with Blue Chew. Because Blue Chew, their tablets aren't just for better sex. No. They are like if Tony Robbins give a motivational speech right to your wiener, you're going to feel amazing. Look, I just took one of Blue Chew's tablets today, and suddenly, look at me, I'm glowing. This table, absolutely getting crushed underneath it, right? My penis is giving a press conference, okay? Feeling great. Never been better. So whether you're trying to make, a memorable moment with your sweet love, or you're just trying to give, a friend of yours or a girl like some crazy group chat fodder, something for the girls to gossip about, Blue Chew is absolutely the chewable tablet delivery service that you need to bring the thunder. And the best part is that we got a special deal for the listeners of this lovely program. Get your first month for free at bluechew.com. Just use the promo code GAGNON at checkout. All you got to do is pay $5 for shipping. That's like a cup of coffee, all right? $5 for shipping. You're going to get free Blue Chew straight to your door. So upgrade your legacy. Let your name ring out for eons. And let's get back to the show. By the mid-1980s, Fritz was effectively managing Hall's life. He even went as far as to rewrite Hall's will, which Fritz then used to get access to Hall's entire estate. And the timing was insane because just a few weeks later, Manly P. Hall passed away. Multiple sources close to Hall have stated that Fritz had essentially moved in and was acting as Hall's caregiver and gatekeeper and his assistant and doing everything all at once. And in the months leading up to Hall's death, Fritz controlled who could see him, what messages got through, and even what Hall ate or did during the day. Former colleagues describe it as this deep isolation, like Hall was being cut off from everyone who had been a part of his life for decades. And the craziest part, Hall's body was found decomposing in a bedroom of his own house. But if Fritz was living there, how did he not notice that Hall was... Anyway, That's the detail that made a lot of people suspicious. People close to Hall felt that something wrong had happened, but no charges were ever filed, and the LAPD chalked it up to natural causes of an old guy. So after Hall's death in 1990, it came out that Fritz had been stealing from the PRS for years. He looted rare manuscripts and grimoires and priceless items from his personal collection. Fritz had taken some of the most important and irreplaceable materials Hall had spent decades collecting, and it forced everyone to ask the uncomfortable question, had the man who spent his life warning about manipulation and hidden agendas become a victim to one completely under his nose? I mean, Hall left behind a massive legacy. His books, the PRS, one of the most impressive private libraries of esoteric materials in the entire world. But even that came with controversy. The Getty Research Institute stepped in and bought large portions of the collection, saying that they could preserve it better than the PRS, while other pieces ended up with private collectors. But of course, some of Hall's followers saw that as a betrayal. They thought that the library should have stayed together as a monument to his work, while others thought, yeah, it makes some sense, right? Hall always said that knowledge should be shared, and getting those materials into stable institutions meant that more people could study them. Ironically, that push into the academic world gave Hall's work kind of some new attention. Scholars who might never have walked into the PRS, I mean, what is that place? Were now diving into his archives at Getty. His ideas were finally getting exposure from a more mainstream crowd, but not always in the ways that he would have wanted. Critics at this point started picking his books apart. I mean, Secret Teachings had errors and misquotes and theories that didn't really hold up. While some of his ideas were outdated, a few sections carried out a lot of casual racism and weird biases of the time, but none of that seemed to slow him down at all in the eyes of, the people that loved him. Most readers today don't really care whether everything that Hall wrote was technically accurate. They cherry pick the ideas that hit the hardest about consciousness and symbols and lost wisdom and just kind of ignore the rest. And that selectivity has kept his influence alive, even if the academic world kind of rolls its eyes at some of his conclusions. So to understand Manly P. Hall, and specifically, his work, not only the Secret Teachings of all ages, but kind of the totality of what he contributed to the occult space, there's a few major takeaways that I think are really helpful. One is that symbolism is important, and it exists in culture and religion, and it has always existed and will always exist. And I think you could say Hall was pretty right? It's these symbols shape thought, and they change how we feel about things based off of what kind of symbols they carry. And he emphasizes that ancient symbols carry psychological and spiritual power, often transmitting ideas that transcend language. And a lot of scholars and psychologists, specifically Jungians and people that follow the teachings of Carl Jung, recognize that archetypes and symbols are crucial to understanding art and religion, even marketing, the way you buy things, things for example, Hall says symbols would act as a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And, Carl Jung and his supporters talk a lot about archetypes and this collective consciousness and, symbols that are, good and capitalistic, like the apple, the wisdom of the apple that sits on the back of our computers. That transmits an ancient symbol, an ancient idea from the Garden of Eden to, Newton to, the modern era of us gaining wisdom from these machines that sit in our pockets. It's a pretty crazy, literally you can think of eating the apple, gaining wisdom. Newton, an apple falls on his head, develops thermodynamics. And now this thing that's in our pocket that's changing fundamentally how we interact with each other, all sort of crested with the same symbol of the apple. He says that this is not a mistake, that this is an intentional, spiritual, sort of divine theater that plays out through all time. That's Manly Hall's idea. He also talks about the decline of meaning without spiritual philosophy. And in a way, he's kind of right. This purely materialistic worldview kind of leads to this emptiness. And he warns in a lot of his writings, specifically in the early 20th century, that if the West abandons spirituality and spiritualism, and specifically ancient wisdom, society would become technologically advanced, but morally bankrupt, which would lead to depression and cultural decay and social isolation. And in a way, I mean, it's kind of prophetic, right? Like today we have this massive mental health crisis that is sort of perpetuated by technology and social fragmentation that's created by, in many ways, the internet, and a loss of meaning in this hyper-materialistic world. And he even writes, man's greatest enemy is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. Basically to say that the problem is not that we're informed, the problem is not that we're not informed, it's the problem is that we think that we're informed, but actually we know nothing, which is, I think, pretty poignant. Yeah, another central idea to a lot of his work is that ancient wisdom contains real psychology. And again, this is barely even controversial. I mean, so many people look at ancient traditions and they're like, oh, wow, yeah, that is profound and transcends time. And he argues that, Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and Buddhism and other esoteric traditions aren't superstitions, but they're just basically early psychology. They're early philosophy. And these systems are designed to awaken inner potential, and they're all trying to do basically the same things. And if we look at our world today, I mean, I have a meditation app on my phone, and, people are using archetypal storytelling to try to understand the world around them and to market products. And all of these things are being rediscovered and sort of validated through, modern science. Another central idea to Manly P. Hall and understanding his work is the power and influence of secret societies. And again, it depends how you define a secret society, but he is right in a way. And he didn't believe, every conspiracy theory, but he did argue that groups like Rosicrucians and Freemasons are quietly shaping philosophy and science, particularly in the Enlightenment and, at the beginning of the American Revolution. And a lot of modern historians would agree, like without really any debate, that Freemasonry certainly influenced the U.S. Constitution and the Founding Fathers, and esoteric thought and sort of this idea of the less rigidity of, modern religion really helped seed the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and that secret societies often preserved knowledge during times that, religion or the church would try to suppress different types of, wisdom. And I think in a way you could justify that, right? I mean, how many of the Founding Fathers were part of Freemasons or the Hellfire Club or other types of, secret societies? I mean, even, the Skull and Bones, like, the Bushes were a part of that. So it's like, it goes all the way up to even modern times. And I'm sure that there's, the Bohemian Grove and these different groups that, people of high power and wealth and access kind of go to in order to trade ideas. Are they necessarily taking the spiritual elements of these ideas? I don't know. Tough to prove. But certainly they're collecting in these sort of secret fraternizing societies where they hang out and they, do stuff together. And they also trade ideas and make business deals and sort of shape the world that we live in. So I'd give Hall kind of a pass on that one as well. And the fifth, core tenet of his work, you could say, is the need for a universal philosophy of brotherhood. And basically what he's saying there is that humanity basically needs to unite through wisdom. And he spent his life trying to basically bridge all of these things together, whether it's the East and the West, religion and science, ancient philosophy versus, modern science. He basically believed that truth is not property of one religion, but something that is shared across all traditions by all people throughout all time. And he kind of anticipated or predicted this global spiritual synthesis that is kind of becoming mainstream today, through comparative religion and like the interfaith movement and, oh, I'm spiritual but not religious, like that kind of thinking. And kind of basically saying that all of these things are on the path to the ultimate truth, which is basically collecting, all of these little tidbits from every teaching, whether it's Islam, Judaism, ancient Egyptian architecture to, modern skyscrapers. They're all kind of working to the same thing of understanding why we're on this planet. I mean, he actually even wrote, philosophy is the science of values. And in a world without values, only philosophy can save us. So that kind of just goes back to this idea that humanity, in order to survive, needs philosophy and it needs spiritual thinkers. And that leads to the bigger question. Does it matter if he was right about everything, or is the real value in what he tried to do, trying to preserve ancient ideas and get people asking big questions about spiritualism and make esoteric knowledge accessible? If you're judging by that measure, he succeeded. right? His books introduced millions of people to traditions that they might have never explored. He built a library that rescued rare texts from obscurity that otherwise might have been crushed, and he pushed readers to think about the world in a way that went beyond politics and money and surface level sort of religion, go to church on Sunday. Some people see him as a genius, some as a mystic, some as a talented but, maybe misguided storyteller. But I think above all, one thing is clear. Hall took ideas that were hidden in these old, like dusty texts, and he brought them to the public in a way that no one else really ever had. He shaped how America thinks about ancient wisdom and symbols and spiritual history. And, Manly P. Hall became what he always wrote about, a symbol, part man, part myth. And maybe at the end of the day, that's exactly what he wanted. I would love to talk to someone that knew him, I would love to know what they would describe him as. If they would be like, oh yeah, he was intense and, sort of like locked in. And the fact that his mom was also like connected to, occultism and occult philosophy is just also fascinating. She seemed like a wild lady. Like she would just abandon her kid to go hunt for gold. Seems a little crazy, but, the good with the bad. Christos, you ever heard of this guy before?
Big time.
Have you?
Yeah, I have a buddy who's really into it, and I think what you can't downplay is his use of symbols and what they mean in certain situations. A lot of the symbols that are very conspiracy theory come directly from Manly P. Hall.
So it'd be like the pyramid or like the all-seeing eye, stuff like that. He really put all that stuff on the map.
Correct.
Yeah, I'd heard that before. I didn't realize that people that really like him, that's the thing that stands out.
And it's also how symbols could be manipulative to people and shape how they feel and think.
Interesting. So you're creating this dollar bill that represents America. We're going to pack it with symbols that even subconsciously people will look at and be like, oh, this is the new Egypt. Like, oh, we're building the new civilization of great tech and great innovators and, global domination, yada, yada, yada.
Exactly.
Interesting. I mean, it checks out. I mean, the dollar bill is packed with so much weird, you got Egyptian iconography, and then you got Latin in there. It ties in Roman influence. That's even just the surface of it. Maybe we do an episode on just breaking down the symbols of the dollar, because there's so much crazy stuff on there. But I mean, if you're like Christos' friend and you're passionate about Manly P. Hall, what did I miss? I would love to know if there's anything that sticks out about his research. Again, I have never gone through the entire Secret Teachings. It's a giant book. Literally a giant book. I have it on my Kindle and I've barely gotten through a quarter of it. So if you're someone that has read it or you're a fan of Manly Hall, drop a comment. I read all of them. I'd love to know what you guys think. Maybe I'll do a follow-up episode going deeper on some of his theories, because I think we could do an episode on every chapter in that book. But yeah, drop a comment. I would love to know what you guys think. If you've never heard of him, what did you think of this episode? Is this something you've considered before? Like how, perhaps everything is connected? I don't know. It seems a little far-reaching for me. It seems like it's unprovable. But from a spiritual sense, you can kind of step away and be like, oh, I see how that kind of makes sense. You get into the details. You're like, all right, that's tough to prove that the Mayans influenced the U.S. Constitution, but who knows? I mean, maybe I haven't read the chapter. Maybe I'll jump into that tonight. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me in my tent for another episode where we explore the secret teachings of all ages throughout all times, throughout every place in the world ever. We do this every single week, and I'd love to see you in my tent one more time, maybe next week. Let's do it then. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you next time here at camp. Peace.
What's up, people? Quick announcement. If you are a fan of Camp Gagnon or Religion Camp, I have great news, because we are dropping History Camp. That's right. This is the channel where we're going to be exploring the most interesting, fascinating, controversial topics from all time throughout all history. Right? You probably know about Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Nikola Tesla. Interesting figures from history, and you probably learned about them in school and they were pretty boring, but not here. No. As you know, I was raised by a conspiracy theorist, so I'm going to be diving deep into all of the interesting, strange, occult, and secretive societal relationships that all of these famous, influential men from our shared past have. So if you're interested, please go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It will be pinned in the description as well as the comments. And if you're on Spotify, this doesn't really apply to you, but these episodes will be dropping as well. Just go ahead and give us a high rating, because it really helps the show.